Hi, everyone. I'm Dimitra Giannakoulias, and I'm a state coordinator for Braver Angels Oregon. If you're new to Braver Angels, we're a grassroots, nonprofit organization dedicated to restoring civic health and reducing partisan conflict. Today, I'm speaking with Marla Estes, who founded and leads the organization Building Bridgers, which, like Braver Angels, aims to build a better civil society by reducing toxic polarization. Building Bridgers celebrates viewpoint diversity and brings people together to see others in ways that inform and impact their own views. In her spare time, Marla likes to swim, play Scrabble, watch movies, and listen to movie soundtracks. Marla, I'm delighted that you're here.
Thank you. Me too. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Definitely. So let's dig in, and we'll start with the question that I always ask every guest right from the beginning, which is tell us a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up, and what were some early influences that shaped you as a person?
Well, I grew up in Los Angeles, right around the corner of La Cienega and Olympic, and which is no man's land. The main thing that formed me is from very early, I think partly informed through trauma, although back then that word wasn't used, and I'm not using it like a capital T trauma, but it caused me to be very deep, I think, or want to be very deep. So from the time I was 13, I got really depressed, and they weren't drugs then, and my mom would have put me on them right away. So I didn't do that, but I went to therapy. And I think looking back and putting the pieces together, I really wanted to go deeper in myself and others. And that, when I look at my life through that lens, it's really been a guiding force, whether I was aware of it or not. So I think that really front loaded this work that I do with depolarizing.
Yeah, so being depressed as a young person drove you deeper. And when you say that you grew up in no man's land, what does that mean
So it's
exactly?
like not West Hollywood, not Beverly Hills. It's like this little corner that it doesn't fit into those things, in those neighborhoods.
Do you think you were born a deep thinker? Because, introversion, deep thinking, depression, they they can go together sometimes.
It's really hard to say. Um, but I do know one thing that I really appreciated about my parents. So as I got older, they would say that they didn't understand me, which is in and of itself not wonderful, but they admired me. They
Interesting.
wish they could be like me, like a deep thinker and looking at things through that lens. So they noticed it. And it was a mixed thing, like not feeling understood, but being admired. It was an interesting, like most people don't have that. They're not understood and they don't feel admired. They feel like they've disappointed their parents or they don't fit with their family. That's something that's been an interesting thread, to feel like it's okay not to be understood. It doesn't mean that I'm not loved.
Right. So you're okay with being misunderstood, but you're still loved.
I
Kind of.
think so. And maybe that helps me be a little more sturdy in the work. Some people do not understand what I'm doing.
So speaking of the work, what sparked your interest in polarization?
Well, it all started the morning of November 16th, 2016, the morning after the first Trump election. And then I woke up with this voice in my head saying, you've got to do something about the political divide, which cracked me up because I had been on one team. Right now, I'm politically homeless, just to say. But back in those days, I was on a team and I just mark off those boxes. I wouldn't do any research. I'd ask friends who to vote for, what to vote for. But I have had that voice a couple times in my life, and I knew not to disregard it. Like I knew it was something. And what I realized also later on is that the past years before that, I had been teaching a class at our local university. It was an elective class, but it was called Exploring Right and Wrong Through Film. And when I look at that in terms of what I ended up doing, I thought that was a precursor because it was all about things aren't black and white. Look at movies that had moral dilemmas. And I'd ask the students, like, well, what would you do and why? And we had great conversations. It was really, really fantastic. I taught that 2 or 3 times. Um, so then what happened? There were a lot of experiences that really moved me along, and I teamed up with another person, Rob Schlapfer, who was doing similar things but more educational. We did these presentations, but we do issues, so immigration or free speech, and we'd present look from the left, look from the right. But what I learned is that people, if they don't have some vetting, I call it, or priming, that they understand their own human operating systems, it was for some people really worse than not doing anything because they doubled down. They'd get triggered, they wouldn't understand it, and they'd get angry and leave or push back. And we were presenting things with not our opinions, just like look from the left, look from the right. But there was an experience that happened in there that really changed me. So, well, prior to that, I had been, a registered Democrat, or at that time even. And we did a thing, I think our presentation that time was on free speech. And this young man who was Iranian, maybe he was in his late 30s, he had come over legally like 5 years prior. And after the whole discussion, he got up and said, looked around, he stood up, he looked around, he said, you all don't know how lucky you are to have the First and Second Amendments. Something about that moment changed me. Really, and I thought about thinking about this country, and I had lived abroad several times, so I knew how things were, and I traveled a lot. I knew how things were in other countries, but I never put together the dots. So this young man really made me see something. And prior to that, this was interesting. Rob did these fabulous flyers, and sometimes he would put American flag on there. And I'm a little embarrassed to say that I said, Rob, you can't put the American flag on there. Nobody from the left will come. And he gently, kind of questioned me about that. But it was this thing, I can't remember this man's name, that really made me see, man, what we have here is special. It also started me seeing how we split this whole thing of psychological splitting, which means, binary thinking, either or, black and white thinking. And it was like I started noticing in everything we did this tendency for either side to either say, this country's really messed up, I wish I could go live in Costa Rica, or there's nothing wrong here. And really, the truth is, there's great things and there's work to be done. And that started me thinking, I'll just tell you how I segued into my own work with that. I don't want to do issues anymore. I think it's really counterproductive. One guy who interviewed me said, oh, you warm people up. I get them ready to be able to have discussions by talking about cultivating humility and talk about confirmation bias, tribalism, emotional reasoning, all these things that help us get ready to be more open-minded and more open-hearted.
But I'm curious, I'm gonna
Yeah.
I'm gonna go a little bit deeper into your
Yes.
story about the Iranian person who was at your event and he stood up and told the group, you all don't know how lucky you are to have the First and Second Amendment. Why do you suppose that struck you as much as it did?
Also, having lived abroad, I was embarrassed about being American. I had a lot of anti-American feelings, and I hadn't really, I mean, this whole work, I know you're going to ask me how this has changed me. This work has changed me personally in profound ways of being able to expand my perception, to understand bigger pictures. And there was something like in that moment that just hit me like, I am not looking at this through the best lens.
You were looking at it from the anti-American perspective of we have so much work to do. We're so broken as a country.
I'm embarrassed to be an
Yeah, I'm
American.
embarrassed to be an American. Maybe I should move to Costa Rica or Portugal or wherever. But his comment shook you out of that spell. You've made it a personal commitment to be in the bridge building space, and that's what you've been doing since 2016. Some people say that bridge building isn't working, or that it's even that it's failed. And this is a criticism that comes especially from conservatives. So, what do you think is not working within bridge building, and how could we make it better or more effective?
Yeah, so I have a lot to say. I've been in the space for about 8 years with bridge building organizations. And especially at the beginning, I found a very left-leaning bias. And this is, I think, from what I know, from what I understand, most bridge building organizations realize that there's this problem. And I will say what I've noticed over these 8 years that some of those organizations have gotten more mature. So at the very beginning, I would be on these calls with however many people, and people in who were bridge builders were making Trump jokes or saying, I don't understand how anyone could vote for Trump. And it's like, that should be bridge building 101. Everyone I think, in the space should know why people vote for whoever, right? They need to understand the other side. So I found an implicit bias in some of these organizations. I won't say all. In fact, I feel like Braver Angels has been really the best of all of these about being even-handed. So what I found in those spaces is that I could wear the conservative hat because I understand most issues. I can sit at any chair around the table and see from that perspective and understand what's valid about all the perspectives. So that's kind of a role I started playing.
How did
Another,
you do that?
how
Because
did I do that?
yeah,
Oh, well,
because you said that you started out, you were, you voted Democrat, just asked your friends who you're voting for. I'm voting for this guy, obviously. You had
right.
your left-wing bias or liberal
Oh, for
bias.
sure.
And how did you start wearing the hat?
Well, because of Rob, who was really, really smart.
Your co-presenter who did
Yeah,
these workshops. Okay.
yes. So he would educate me and just not tell me, and also teach me how to think, not just what to think. But he, in fact, exposed me to a lot of good writers from all kinds of spectrums. And just to say, side note here, and this is why I think I'm good at what I do, is I really know what happens to your nervous system when you start changing your mind. Not only learning that, but presenting with him at the same time. And sometimes people will call me a right-wing ideologue or a left-wing ideologue. Like, people didn't get, like, no, we're just presenting perspectives. We're not telling you what to think. But anyway, in those early days, I would get so anxious that I would get in a hot bathtub, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day, just to stop shaking. So I really understand what it is to change. I felt like I was getting rewired. And some of the people in the bridging world, and you may have heard this, think that the biggest problem that keeps people stuck is this tribalism, because people feel safe. People like to feel certain also, even if they're wrong. Our nervous system likes to feel sure, even if we're wrong. So that's why people double down a lot of the time. So I got educated by Rob, which was really great because he curated things for me, so I could not have to read everything, and I could ask him questions because he really understood all that. But I want to tell you an anecdote, take this opportunity. So I worked, how will we call it? I was in a program at one of these bridging organizations, which I won't name. And we worked in cohorts. People had different problems in their communities that they wanted to work on. Like, maybe people wanted to non-politically, but they were like, start a recycling thing, or have people come to the library more, or get people to move to their small town, like all these things. But part of this process was you need all the stakeholders at the table. And so the cohorts, there were maybe 6 cohorts of 2 or 3 people each, they were complaining that they couldn't get conservatives to come to their things. So here's the interesting story. So I'm shaking as I was doing this, but I said, if I were a conservative and I saw like this one group had the word equity in their flyer. I said, if I were conservative and I saw the word equity, I wouldn't come to your event because it's like a left-wing signal, no matter what I think about equity or not. I'm not talking about that. I said, just like if I had a flyer as a conservative that said, let's talk about patriotism, maybe some of you in this room would not come. That night at that dinner, this one woman in our group came up to me. She said, when you said you were a conservative, the whole room bristled. And I said, well, first of all, I did not say I was a conservative. And I said, that's really interesting. So the next day we had it the second day of our thing. And one of the groups said, well, how would I suggest that they engage conservatives? And I said, well, someone came up to me last night and told me the whole room bristled when they thought I was a conservative. I said, if that was the case with any of you in this room, that's where you start.
That's where you start.
Right. If you personally are bristling, you start there because that reads in a room. And that's why I think that your question about conservatives not getting involved, they have felt a little bit bait and switch, like come, let's bridge. And then it's like, come over to my bridge. And there's these, can be these invisible eye rolls and things like that. We read each other. We're savvy. We know how to read body language and tone. Um, so I think there's a lot of legitimate reasons why that has happened. But I do say, and I said this earlier, I think I see some maturation in some of these groups that I've listened to for 8 years, and it's to the good. But, the memo's not out. That's one of my big things has always been getting more conservative engagement. So you ask, what can we do? Languaging, like I just said, is super important because and if you don't judge people for what they're taking the word to be, we've got this, what do you call it, shorthand. But for example, I'm working on a project here locally. The person who's putting it together wanted to know what to call it. She said, what about cultural bridging? I said, it's your gig, but frankly, that is not gonna engage. I'm concerned about all people coming. And so then we came up with community building. So I think both the word community seems to have stayed kind of clean. Sides like that word, and building is pretty clean. So I was really pleased about that. And to her credit, she thanked me. She said, I had no idea. If we're swimming in a certain water, we don't know it's water. We just assume that everyone takes things like we do, right?
It's interesting you mentioned that community building thus far is cleaner than the term bridging because bridging or bridge building has acquired a bias, a kind of perceived
Yeah,
left or liberal bias, which turns some conservatives away when they hear that. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So what's wrong with that word, bridging, do you think?
Well, I just think that it's been used in a lot of these bridging organizations, and I think it's gotten kind of tainted by how it's been used. It's nobody's fault. One of the things I teach about is how we all make these shortcuts. Now, shortcuts, we're wired to shortcut. They're very helpful, except when they're not. And in politics, is not helpful. So we hear a word, patriotic. Oh, that's going to be right wing. I'm not going.
Yeah.
Some of these words are completely fine. But also I feel like we've got to reel back and use new words. Like I think what I've started saying more than bridging is depolarizing, which I think is a little less lefty sounding, but it's a problem with languaging.
We have a Braver Angels language guide internally available to members, but we talk about that. Even though we all speak English, actually we've developed these different subcultures, and English almost has these dialects now where the
Yeah,
same words don't really mean the same things to people.
exactly.
So yeah,
Exactly.
I love that you're calling out words like equity, seems to mean one thing to those who use it, which tend to be more liberal thinking folks, and patriotism means different things. But when conservatives use it, it has a very negative connotation for left-leaning folks. Yeah. What
Yeah.
are some other words that stand out in your mind?
Well, I'm thinking about equity, like what I suggested to that group back then is use fairness. I think fairness is still
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah.
But I want to make a couple more points about what could make it more effective to bring conservatives in or to bring more balance in the field. This is more like just like I call it a Zen koan, like a question that has no answer, but just pondering it is fruitful. And so what's true is we're wired for us versus them. We're also wired for collaboration and cooperation. So my kind of question as I'm like working in the back of my mind is how can we move the needle? How can we switch from us versus them to we? And so I don't have the answer, although, my approach, as I've said, is like at the very micro personal level. Kind of things I teach are helping people not see some hating someone or seeing them as the enemy for who they voted for. And there's a whole lot of things that go under that. The other thing that I think could be helpful is giving people reasons to buy in. And I don't know how this is now, but I remember several years ago reading articles from people in the bridging world that they thought the hardest thing was to get people to really buy in for the long term. So people can buy in because, they have family members or people at work that they have a problem with. One of the things I talk about is like spiritual and religious traditions. I think all of them have some kind of message like we are all one, we are all God's children. However,
Mhm.
that it's worded, but how do we live this? And that's one thing I found for myself. I'm not religious particularly, and I have my own ideas about spirituality, but in terms of, I feel like it's about the feeling that we're all connected, pretty simple. But this work, I dare use the word sacred because it really does move me towards we are all one. We all exist here. We all share in the same big space. And yeah, to me, there's a higher calling about all this, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, we are all one, no matter who we voted for, no matter the policy stances we have, no matter what we say we believe, no matter what value we espouse, we are still one because when we write someone off, oh, I'm not going to talk to you because you voted for so and so, or you say you believe that, you put them other. They're now, you're not one, it's now me
Right,
versus the other person.
right. And you're right. And you're not included.
And you're
You know,
not included.
there's the whole thing about the inclusion movement, but the question to ask oneself is who am I really including?
Who am I really including? Exactly.
Yeah. So it's just a question, just
Yeah.
something to ponder. Um,
It's interesting you say that because one of the buzzwords for me that I tell people not to say if they want to include conservatives is don't use the word inclusion. Don't
yeah.
talk about inclusion. So just do it, but don't say it.
Right. Or diversity is the other word, but I like to play with that. I'll say, and I often do this in presentations. I'll say, who here has heard the phrase viewpoint diversity? No one raises their hand, which is really interesting. And I said, well, yeah, diversity is a big word, but not so much viewpoint diversity. But that is another form of diversity that needs to be included.
Right.
And not only because of all the things we've already said, but to come to better solutions. It's kind of like this, what do they call it? The dialectic thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Take an idea, its opposite, kind of mush it around, and you come up with out of the box thinking, something
Something
new.
new that
It's a
emerges from the two that
that
clash,
yes,
forge something new. Yeah.
yes,
Yep.
exactly. And a lot of people think that bridging is compromising or meeting in the middle, which on some things is probably the best solution, but for the what they call the wicked problems, which are the complicated problems, complex problems, we need that kind of thinking. We need all the good thinking at the table, not people saying, well, the Republicans say this, so I'm not listening to it, or vice versa. The Democrats are saying this. That's what I want to see in our politics is people at the top willing, not even more than willing, being inspired to work together. That's my hope, is that in future elections, we can elect people who are, whatever banner they're flying under, they are willing to do things together. We cannot keep doing things this way. We just can't. That's what I also tell people, about this buy-in. Even if your side is 100% right, which I don't think anybody is 100% right, it's not practical. Like, we're not getting stuff done. So there's a lot of people that don't believe in bridging, that are on the extremes, I would say. And I had somebody in my life maybe 8 years ago said she didn't believe in bridging, her side needed to win. I said, well, that's fine, but it's not practical. And years later, I talked to her about it just recently, and she calls herself a pragmatist, which I love. This is the thing, even about Braver Angels or any of the people doing the good work of depolarization, we just don't know the seeds we're planting. That's really mostly what keeps me doing this, is like, I don't know how this is going to show up later on for people. They won't necessarily tell me, but I think it's doing some good.
You've alluded a little bit to my next question, which is, what do you think each side could be doing better to solve the problem? Because in Braver Angels, we do talk about how we think that everybody's simultaneously a part of the problem, but also a part of the solution. We're all in it. We all have responsibility for the problem and the solution. So what do you think each side could be doing to better solve our problem of toxic polarization?
So my orientation is towards the micro, like I said. But the first thing I would say anybody who's listening should do is take a depolarizing within workshop from Braver Angels.
Oh,
No, it's really brilliant. So brilliant. And listeners, if you have a chapter in where you live, go in person, but they also have them online. I think that is a great place to start, is seeing where you are polarized within, especially if you think bridging is a good idea or want to try it on for size. I think that's a really good place to start. And in those workshops, correct me if I'm wrong, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're blue or red. Sometimes they want balance, but anybody can come anytime, because it's not really political. It's talking about how you feel about things. I still think, like, my classes really help. It's part of the depolarizing within, the humility, learning to be curious about viewpoint diversity, not push it. A lot I talk about the obstacles. So not so much what to aspire to, although that's fine, but a lot of times that's kind of empty. I'm more interested in what gets in the way of this natural compassion or natural humility or virtue. Virtue is a word that's also questionable. Like, some people on the left don't like that word because it sounds religious to them. I found out. But other people, maybe conservatives, like that because it's more in maybe their vernacular, or certainly church-wise and things like that. But anyway, I think virtue is a really good word. And I like to talk about what gets in the way. So I think that's good for everyone. Oh, this is another thing that I think is really helpful. Do you know the Hidden Tribes study or the perception gap study?
I'm familiar with the perception gap study, not hidden tribes, but say a little more about both.
Oh, yeah. So the point being is that, and people can go on their site, it's perceptiongap.us, and you can take a little quiz to see how polarized you are. But they did a very good study about, I think they take 6 issues, and you sign in as a red or a blue or an independent, and they ask you the appropriate questions, but you rate how extreme you think people on the other side are on their views. I know it's kind of confusing. I get a little dyslexic on this one, but what it turns out, what their conclusion is most people significantly judge their opposing side as more extreme in their views than they actually are. And it's almost like one of the most important things to understand is that a lot of what people are reacting to is a misperception. And then, of course, if your media silos are feeding you the framing things or only telling one side of a story, that just feeds into these perception gaps. So media literacy is something good for everybody. And I'm going to make a plug for readtangle.com. It's a really good place to get your news and perspectives. What else can help people? I think is being more comfortable with not knowing, like not having to have an opinion about everything. And as I said before, our nervous system likes to have opinions. It makes us feel, it gives us the illusion of being safe and sure and on the right side of history. But I think to be more and more comfortable with not being certain or not knowing is like a superpower. People think it means wishy-washy, but it doesn't. It means I don't know enough about X to really have an opinion about it, which that's what I found in one of my things. Like most things I don't have an opinion on because I keep on getting new information that I think, oh, I didn't know that before. That's kind of changes me. So I have a working hypothesis, but I'm really poised to pivot. But I couldn't have done that unless my nervous system was okay with like, okay, I don't know, this is confusing. The answer depends. And things, so much needs to be into context. And if people are putting a black and white answer into everything that relates to whatever policy or issue, there's no context. I think the answer, it depends, is a really good answer for most things.
That's
So I
where
think
humility starts, right?
that it really does. And that's why thank you for circling back around, because in my classes, when I do them, like a year-long class, that's the first thing we start on is humility.
Mhm.
The first thing I do is say, how many of you in this room are never wrong? And so everybody laughs, but it's a really great way to start saying, yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. We are all mistaken sometimes. It's a good
Right.
thing that we can change our mind then. So yeah, I think those are some of my thoughts about what could be done.
In your experience, what do you think conservatives misunderstand the most about liberal-minded people? And what do liberal-leaning people misunderstand about conservatives?
Okay, so that's an interesting question, and it's a difficult question because within each party, there are lots of factions. So you've got like the more progressive left to the more centrist, old-fashioned liberal left, and you've got like MAGA Republicans and not MAGA Republicans. I've been thinking about this a lot, Demetra. Like, in a way, we have to talk about red and blue, but there's also the question, is it keeping the stereotype also reinforced? Do you know what I mean? But we have to
Do.
be able to talk about it. So sometimes what I've started doing in classes is like saying some people think. So kind of break it up and not get people locked into then making their shortcut. Oh yeah, Dems bad, Republicans good, or whatever, vice versa. So the other thing that I do is I'm
So
just,
just to be clear, a
yeah,
strategy is to add nuance. Some think,
ex-
some
ex-
believe this, some think this
exactly,
approach,
exactly.
but not all. So to add nuance and layer some complexity that
Right.
some
So
are, some are not. Okay.
right. And often when we say like, well, I don't know if you've heard this, but some people have started using plaid people or checkered people, right? To kind of break up the and so if you say, well, checkered people are bigoted, it's much different if you say some checkered people are bigoted, right? Because when we don't put a qualifier, all is assumed.
That's right. When we don't put a qualifier, all is assumed. All
So,
the people, all the reds, all the blues,
right,
right?
all women, all men.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's like one thing. In some of my presentations, I said, I hope this is the one thing you take away is catch yourself. And even when I'm presenting, I'll catch myself. I'll say something, generalized, and I'll say, whoops, and roll it back. Some X think this. So I just want to front load that is why it's difficult to talk about your question in terms of the misunderstanding of the two sides. But I think even talking about it like this starts scrambling up the binariness of it. The other thing is that just because someone voted for X doesn't mean you know anything about them. And I think you've seen too that studies and research shows that most people these days are voting against someone, not really for someone. That's
Right.
the lesser of two evils. And so I worked with this guy who was a Trump supporter and he campaigned for Trump, but he himself was for all open borders. I've known people who are Democratic, who are big on second gun right amendments, you know? So don't assume that you know what the beliefs and values are of the people that you know. But I will say something specific because you did ask a specific question. So some on the left think that conservatives are hard-hearted, you know, they're not generous. And some on the right, or as you would say, reds, think the left are too soft-hearted and they have trouble seeing when helping actually doesn't help, the kind of enabling idea. And both these things can be true. This is about splitting again. Oh, those left people, they're, you know, those blues, they're just softies. They enable. And then leftists saying that the reds are so hard-hearted and selfish and pull yourself up by the bootstraps. So there's a huge spectrum between those two. And I read something recently, this book by Kurt Gray called Outraged. Yeah, so he's taking the idea, he I don't want to say too much because I don't want to misrepresent, but what I understood is his take on the split is that both sides are really concerned with care and fairness, but it's to who?
Right. Who's the target of the care and fairness?
Right. And I think that is a really, you know, some of the things for me, Demetra, it's not, well, this theory is true and it fits all the time. It's like the more lenses I can bring to looking at something gives me, it's like looking at a facets of diamonds, right? You get more of the big picture, the full picture. And, you know, it's reminding me of a story of friends that I have that were pretty far on the left and for, you know, open borders-ish. And they went to visit, I think, friends or family in one of the border towns. And they saw and heard about the problems with the infrastructure. This is not a judgment against immigrants or anything. It's just like the structure wouldn't hold.
Mhm.
And I think that's, if we can approach some of these issues, like caring for the immigrants and what happens and who gets in and who doesn't and how, but also for the people who have to deal with the downside of that, like the taxpayers who feel like they don't have enough to support their own communities that aren't doing well. I'm going to say one more thing. Robert Sapolsky, he's a neuroscientist. But he's written a lot of books that are good for lay people. You don't have to be a scientist, but he does this great clip about us versus them. And he says, and he's talking about oxytocin, that if that's the bonding chemical hormone. And he said, you'd think if you spritzed it up everybody's nose, everything would be kumbaya, his words. But what they found in these studies is people become more bonded and attached to the people they include. But in his words, they're crappier to the people who they deem against those people. But the idea is, can we have empathy rise? All ships rise? Have to pick a side, like instead of saying this is hard on both sides. And this is back to that coming up with new solutions, right? You
Yeah.
can't have a new solution if you say we're going to do everything for side A and too bad for side B and vice versa. It's like, how do we think of things so side A and side B can both benefit?
So just to sum up, it sounds as though the key misunderstanding that any side will have about their other side is this tendency to overgeneralize. It's overgeneralization about who they think the other side is or does. It's the classic stereotyping issue that we have hardwired into our brains, isn't it? So,
Yes. And this is the other thing, that all of this work, you know, trying to catch ourselves is hard at first and it's tiring. But as you do it, it becomes more and more second nature. And I can say that from experience. So it seems hard at first because we're actually overriding our biology. And that's hard on our nervous systems.
That's a great segue into what I'd like to ask you next, which is what has changed for you personally while you've been doing this work? So you're rewiring yourself, and what else? And what else have you learned?
I, well, I love this question. I feel like this work has allowed me to live more and more my potential in every way, not just in the work way. As a person, as a human being, I feel so personally enriched by this way of being able to look at the world. So I feel that, I feel a lot more humility. Like in the past, felt easily humiliated. And I've just learned to turn humiliation into humility, which is it's another superpower. And I feel like I can hold and not only hold many perspectives at the same time, but also see the validity. And there's a little bit of a difference there, but we need both, I think. And I don't need to have a conclusion or an opinion so much. And that's really liberating. That's what most of my students in the long term, they'll say they don't get triggered as much and that they don't need to know everything or have opinions about everything. And not only that, but they like that feeling. It's so much more relaxing. So another buy-in, another thing that you can do by depolarizing is your nervous system. It's just a lot more relaxing. And it doesn't mean that we're Pollyannas or ostriches or wishy-washy. It means that we're able to hold a lot of perspectives without getting upset. As a part of that, I feel like I have more capacity to both zoom in and zoom out at the same time. So like see the forest and the trees. That seems like they're mutually exclusive, but there's ways to cultivate some of these habits of mind that make that more possible. It's the kind of thing that when I heard that voice and I said yes, if I had known how hard it was going to be, especially those first few years, I wouldn't have said yes. But I am really, really, really glad I did.
What do you think ordinary people like you and me can do to heal the country and repair our civic health? Simple things.
Well, I said some of them in the body of what I said, but I'll circle back on, to simple is catch yourself in the act when you're splitting or generalizing. And just, a simple thing is you catch yourself and use the word some, or you could say many or most, or you could say all kinds of things, but don't leave people to think you're meaning all. And I think once you start doing things like that, other things start cascading.
Mhm.
It kind of makes an internal change as well. But there's a quote that I found that is not, I can't find the attribution, but I didn't make it up. And this is really would be my biggest thing to say. If all you do is not add to the chaos of the world, you are doing the world a great service. So the more we all calm our nervous systems down, again, not with going numb or being Pollyannas, the more we help the collective nervous system and
Right.
kind of ratchet some of this
Yeah.
panic down, panic and outrage.
Use the word some.
Yes.
Catch yourself. Use the word some. We also catastrophize. So a way to ease those natural human tendencies is to qualify with words like some. And then
Yeah.
don't add to the chaos, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Be careful about the social media posts and whatnot. Yeah.
Right. There's another quote, something like if you, by Charles Eisenstein, something like if you catch yourself sharing something on social media and it's smuggling in some form of hate or derision, stop.
Stop.
And this question also that we can all ask ourselves, whether we're talking to friends or posting or whatever, am I heightening polarization or am I reducing it? Am I making it better or worse?
Well, thanks so much, Marla. It's been so
Yeah.
great to talk with you. Is there anything else you'd like to add
Yeah,
before?
I will do one more thing. I am giving an online class called How to Build a Bridge on October 29th. And if people want to find out about it, they can contact me at marla@buildingbridges.com.
Okay, that sounds great. And it's building bridgers with an R at the end.
Yes. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Marla. And thanks again to everyone listening. If you'd like more information about Braver Angels, please go to our website, braverangels.org. And to find out about local events, go to braverangels.org/Oregon.
Sing it if you know it. I love you.
Music for this episode is Hello, I Love You, written by Ben Karen and Leo Gallo, and performed by Ben Karen, Fadine Keelty, Ray Cole, Nathan Heldman, Oscar Bugarin, and Mary Keating. Watch this and other songs by Ben Karen on youtube.com/Ben Karen Creates. That's BenCaroncreates. Thanks to Ben and team for allowing us to use this song.
You know I love you.